How concerned are you about global economic weakness? Is a global recession a possibility here?
So global growth is subdued, and we describe it as fragile. There are many downside risks, and one of the risks that we keep flagging is risks on the trade front, the uncertainty surrounding it, and the developments that we're seeing as early as as recently as today, gives us grave concern about what's going to happen to growth going forward.
There's just an objective statistic here, which is that world trade has declined, and world trade is something that has declined before other recessions. Is the signal there similar to other downturns?
So trade is indeed showing a lot of weakness. We're seeing a lot of weakness in industrial production and manufacturing. But on the other hand, if you look at services is still holding up, though not as brightly as it was at the start of this year. So I think it's a mixed bag of signals. On the one hand, you're seeing a huge demand for safe assets, which is what you typically see before a recession. Equity markets are volatile, but they're still high. So it's mixed around the world. And like I said, there's consumer confidence, services sectors are still doing fairly well, especially in some parts of the world like the U.S.
How much of the global economic weakness is related to trade policy?
Some part of it is, but not all of it is. So it's not just the tariffs that are in place, but it's the tremendous uncertainty about where this policy is headed, and will there be closure anytime soon. And that's weighing on business confidence, and we're seeing it on investment. But an important part of the slowdown is also what's coming from emerging markets. And emerging markets, we've seen pretty strong weakness there in emerging markets. And this is Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Turkey. And that's weighing on growth. And that's coming also from idiosyncratic factors in their own countries.
What should the world be doing right now to offset this weakness? If there's a lot of central bankers in there that have certain tools. There's even some finance ministry officials. Should they all be talking together? Should there be global cooperation on the issue of addressing the weakness in the global economy? I
mean, monetary policy is being accommodative. That's an appropriate stance. It is going to be data-driven, and it's going to depend upon, as Chairman Powell said, for the U.S., it's going to depend on what's happening on the global front, but it's also going to depend on what's happening with inflation in the U.S. There is more to be done on the fiscal front. I think it would be a good idea for governments to plan for the possibility that they will need to use their fiscal tools more aggressively than is being used right now, especially countries that have fiscal space. But that said, I think the number one issue out there is with respect to trade and trade policy. Now, that has to be addressed.
Let's do a Jim Cramer lightning round on the world here. I'm going to ask you about some reasons, and give me your quick answer. The U.S., is U.S. monetary policy too tight?
U.S. monetary policy is being accommodative, and it is being data-driven. So it's going to depend upon how the facts come in. If you look at the U.S. economy, and if you look at the unemployment rate, and if you look at consumer spending, they are quite healthy. And so it would not be right to say that it's too tight at this point.
Europe. Would more negative interest rates help the European economies grow?
I mean, the European economy certainly needs stimulus, including on the monetary front. The traditional conventional space is limited. They will require going into more unconventional tools. We know that those do have an impact. They do help. But again, I would also flag to the fact that there could be more done by countries like Germany on the fiscal front, given the fiscal space that they have.
You're doing great, by the way, for not knowing this game was coming. Japan. Does Japan tell us that low negative interest rates are not the cure-all, and even strong government spending? Don't they have a deficit to GDP ratio of more than 200%, or debt to GDP? It's more like 300, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is. It is high. It is one of the highest in the world. I think the point that has to be acknowledged is that reforms matter too. Structural reforms matter. And many of these advanced economies are grappling with aging demographics, low productivity growth, and those things cannot be addressed by monetary policy or fiscal policy directly, for that matter.
Can you find for me a bright spot? Is there some place in the world that's performing better than you expected and shows promise or makes you optimistic about development in certain areas?
I mean, as the year was progressing, it's getting harder to find those bright spots. There was the potential of recovery, and we're still projecting that for many parts of the world, including for stressed economies. But I have to admit, it's getting harder to see that.
Are there any place? I mean, Chile seems to be holding up, bordering in Argentina, right? Argentina, though, we didn't talk about South America yet.
Yes.
This is a mess, right?
I
know maybe you can't respond to it that way.
There are concerns. In fact, some of the biggest downgrades we've made to growth has been for the Latin America region. Indeed, we've had pretty dramatic cuts in forecasts for some parts, especially Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. And so it is an important issue. And again, the issues there are not directly about the trade tensions and the trade concerns there. They have some of their own domestic problems.